13-year-old Julie right now is dying that we're going to have the conversation that we're going to have today on a podcast. In public, we're going to talk about periods. Because 13-year-old Julie didn't even want to tell her own parents. I don't know, it was part of what the culture was like then. We had learned about it in school, but everyone kind of laughed about tampons, and you'd find kids throwing them at each other in the hallway or whatever kids do. And so 13-year-old me, when I started my period, I didn't even, my parents are amazing, but I didn't even want to tell them because is this a good thing? Is this not a good thing? Should we talk about it? Do we whisper about it? So,
yeah, I started about 2.5 years earlier than that. So now I was really freaking out. Mom, what is this? She's like, oh, 13-year-old Reischea was like, how do I get out of swim? Because I'm not swimming.
Yeah.
But here we are. Yeah. We're going to talk about periods, people.
Here we are. So 13-year-old Julie is probably like, oh my gosh, don't talk about this. But 90-year-old Julie is, I can only hope that she's like, yes, you started the conversation and look at where we are now, because this is something that we all need to be talking more about. So I think the future us is really cheering us on right now and helping to guide this conversation, because I really believe that this world would be a very different place if periods were celebrated or even just talked about, even if we just didn't whisper about them anymore. So today we're going to talk about it with the founder of a super cool new startup.
Yes, let's do this. The Think Tank of Three podcast starts now. Welcome to the Think Tank of Three podcast. I am your show host, Reischea Canidate-Kapasouris, along with Julie Holton. Our third today is Katie Krick, the founder of the Period Pick-Me-Up. I mean, that even just sounds a little bit on the awesome side. It's a monthly subscription box full of self-care goodies so that when it's time for your period, for once in your life, you can actually look forward to it because there's something coming to you that's on the positive. I mean, there's clearly something coming to you, but I'm
Katie, we are so excited to have you on the show.
Oh
Welcome.
My gosh. Good morning. Hello.
Clearly we need to sign Reischea up for this box because I don't know that I look forward to my period now.
Oh, so fun.
Because I don't know that I'll ever do that, but I look forward to getting my subscription box.
Exactly. There's a gift coming. There's something you can put in your hand that you want, not the other thing per se, because there's everything attached to that, but there's something that you get. I'm finally getting something that I'm looking forward to that goes with this ridiculousness that's annoying on every month.
First of all, welcome to the show. Tell us about the Period Pick-Me-Up. What is it?
Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. I founded the Period Pick-Me-Up truly. If I was kind of looking farther ahead than my brain was at the time that I was doing the nitty-gritty, I founded it because I believe that the time is now for a total disruption of mindsets and markets around menstruation. Just completely.
Yeah.
We have it upside down. We have it backwards. Nothing about it is good. So I really was like, gosh, so much of my life is informed by having a period, whether or not I want to admit that, right? And I mean, we can get into this very deeply, but basically I recognize that we've conditioned girls and women to expect that their period is going to be awful and that they are required to keep it completely secret. And there's no support offered to them to do either of those two things. Right?
That's a good point.
Which is bonkers. Plus, the work of having a period is critical to humanity. So those things do not square at all, right? Something that is so critical to humanity and so impactful to the daily life experience of women should not also be kept secret, and it certainly shouldn't be unsupported, but it completely is. So I had this moment during the pandemic when I tell this story now, when I was by my toaster and I was buttering a piece of toast and just like fuming with the rage that comes from being the day before your period starts, I guess. And then I'm like, I cannot believe that I am hemorrhaging from my uterus. And like, I'm not even getting a present for it. Like, there's like nothing happening for me to really accurately reflect the significance of what's going on. Like, I get presents on my birthday and I didn't do anything to get born. So I just looked for one. I was like, well, there's subscription boxes coming out of our ears for everything, right? Like, I should be able to find something like this that comes to me every 28 days just to make myself feel better. And I couldn't find anything. I could get tampons delivered, I could get pads delivered, but I couldn't just get, I mean, I use a cup, so I don't need those things. And so I was like, well, what if I just made one? And then that brought me into a year of open conversations with a lot of women who were like, yes, please do that thing. And now here we are.
Isn't it amazing when you just have a discussion about something, how it just leads to that next step? It's like, had we just opened up our mouths in the first place. But if you have, I know for me, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I don't want to talk about it, or from a sense of secrecy or type of thing. For me, it was just like, I had such horrible cycles for such a long time because I had uterine fibroids and the whole, I mean, so I was, maybe the period pick me up box would have been helpful, but I don't know, because I was cycling for like 2 to 3 weeks. So
well, when I talk about that too, like with my friends or with my husband or even in my own brain, like, God, am I making light of periods that are like that need medical intervention? I don't want to do that. So it is kind of a balance, right? And obviously it's a luxury to be able to buy things for yourself that you don't need to support your life. And so how do we, deal with inclusion in the right way? And so it is kind of an ongoing conversation. So your early periods were terrible, even as a young girl?
So as a young girl, my early ones were just I had really bad cramps. I always had really bad cramps. And usually mine were about 7 days, even when I was younger. So I always was like, when they told us for PE, when we had swim that particular week, you had your sections of whatever. And so if I happened to hit my cycle when we were on the swim part of the PE class, they were like, you get 3 days. I'm like, what do you mean I get 3 days? My cycle is just started today. 3 days takes me to, Wednesday, and I'm still going. Like, so I don't understand this 3 days thing. And, oh, well, you don't do this in the pool. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So
and even that shows how little is known. I think sometimes it's like the lack of education is really astounding. And it's not lost on me either, Reischea, as you're describing like the pain and discomfort that you like. Discomfort's even like a nice way of putting it. Like you have had some serious pain from your periods, from your cycle, from the natural thing that your body is doing. Right. And it's interesting to me that the only time in general that periods are talked about, like on TV shows or like wherever kids or, where anyone might see them, is they're being described as like we're laughing about them, or we're like blowing someone off because they're hormonal or they have an opinion or they're having emotions. And so it must be their time of the month. And so it's like it's just so degrading because yes, your emotions are heightened. Like, yes, there are hormones that, that ramp up and cause you to feel and act in certain ways, but we're going to make fun of that instead of actually acknowledging the person that it's impacting. Like, even sometimes now I look at, like the little girls in my life who are, the young teenagers, and how we kind of roll our eyes. Sometimes we're all guilty of this, even us women. We kind of roll our eyes sometimes and we're like, oh my gosh, like those hormones, like those teenager hormones. And the reality is like, yes, and we can privately roll our eyes, but also there's a human being that is going through like what we are seeing. Someone is actually feeling and experiencing. And it's just crazy to me that all we can do as a society is kind of laugh about it or scoff about it. and brush it off. But we're talking about like half the world's population that is feeling and experiencing these very real body, natural things that our bodies go through.
Yeah, but that honesty like comes at the cost of, or has at least until now, come at the cost of participation in the workforce, right? Like, we better not be honest about how much our bodies are impacted by this. So that's going to be another reason why hiring women is too expensive.
Yeah. Well, look at Reischea's example. Here she has to sit out of gym class. And also, by the way, that sucks. Like everyone in gym class now knows this thing that is supposed to be secret. And then she has to sit out and like for what? But now you take that example and what that does to a kid. And now we're talking about women in the workforce, like something that we do to make ends meet. And we, it's like on a whole different level.
Yeah. Reisch, did you feel shame or embarrassed about that? Or were you like, yes, like, I mean, what was the culture like in your school around that?
I'll be honest. So I came from growing up in, I had a strong mom and my dad. So it took a lot for me to feel shame about anything. Yeah. I was that person who was like, whatever. But you
were like that.
How many times have I said to someone, this is not the week. All right. This is not the week.
See, and I'll say that now.
Right. And I do. And I do.
Like me as a kid, no way. Like I was shy. It's hard to believe, but like I was so much more in my shell. Like I did not want anyone to know my business.
Right. And so I never personally had an issue discussing it or whatever, or, maybe that typical when the boys were around, that's probably when you're like, I'm not really kind of getting into this, but we're all the girls in the locker room. I'm like, whatever. That's not to say though, I did know girls who were like, they didn't really want to talk about it or whatever. And I remember first learning about it in elementary school. And I can't remember what the movie was, but we were like all outside and all of a sudden everybody kept saying, my stomach hurts. And that was like the big joke. But I can empathize with individuals who probably did feel some kind of way because of how societies look at it and, oh, she's a girl or whatever. And if you are in mixed company with your male counterparts, I mean, I'm going to be however old I'm going to be past 45, but I'm getting physical therapy for my shoulder right now. And we're in the workout room and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I need my jacket. I'm like, and I said out loud, I'm like, I don't have a happy medium of temperature. I'm either really, really hot or really, really cold. And there's nothing I can do about it because I'm approaching 50. And the guy looked at me, he's like, I'm just not going to say anything. And I'm just going to walk that way. I'm like,
let's empower our men to not feel that way.
Calm down, dude. You're not in trouble.
Right. I mean, I kind of feel sorry for him that he's so uncomfortable with that. Like I was telling Katie at one point, had her on my show Expert Connections. And as we were talking, that was the week I just wrapped up my period. And I was like, yeah, like last night at the dinner table, I'm in my pajamas at dinner time at 5:30. And Colin was like, oh, are you feeling okay? And I was like, yeah, it's my time of the month. We just normalize it in our house, my 15-year-old and boy. And it's like, because that's how it should be. So that he doesn't grow up into, the man that is doing physical therapy with you and feeling like, I don't know what to say. I'm so uncomfortable.
But even though you were willing to talk about it, both of you, and Reischea as a child, which is what you were when you were 13, you talked about it, but you still weren't really getting any support that actually helped.
Right.
Like,
yeah. And Katie, that's
like, we tolerate way more dramatic symptoms for our periods and menopause than we actually need to. But our healthcare providers fail us a lot of the time.
Right.
And Katie, I want to get into your actual startup because it's so cool. But first, I think it's a really important point that part of like you've developed a product that's in support of, period wellness and raising the positivity levels. But for you, it's also just as much about conversations like these. Like, what changes do you want to see this world making when it comes to women and their periods?
So many things, right? I mean, we've known for a long time that scientific research, up until several years ago when this was finally, I believe, changed formally, scientific research has historically been done on the majority of the patients were male, and the research was applied to female bodies. So this is true in like nutrition and exercise and sleep, and also in things like safety, like seatbelt designs. More women die in car accidents than men because seatbelt designs fit male bodies. You know what I mean? Like, what can be done about that? We're not going to like build cars for women and for men. So I'm not saying there's an easy solution there, but my point is that like truly there is a genuine lack of information about women's bodies. And so that's very hard to operationalize. So one, I think crucially important thing is to not be afraid of offending people when we just talk frankly and factually about biological femininity, biological masculinity as it relates to medical care. And that's a complex question, a complex conversation that goes on. But when we don't talk to girls about how their nutritional needs are different than boys, then girls are not eating foods that help them during times in their period, during their cycles. So our diet.
I love this. By the way, we did a podcast episode with Claudine Francois, episode number 58. We'll link to it. She talks about, she's a health and nutrition coach, and she talks about all of the research that has not been done on women and our diets and what we should be eating. And so if anyone's interested in hearing more about that, check back on that episode with Claudine, because you're right. Like, it's crazy. Like, even the food pyramid that we all look to for guidance, like, not only was that developed by the lobbyists, but also it's not based on women's bodies. And our, I mean, in case you didn't notice, our bodies are different. For instance, we have periods, but I mean, our needs are very different.
Right. They really are. And again, at least from a medical perspective, as far as it relates to care, nutrition, sleep, exercise. And like, I was an avid CrossFitter for like 7 years. Sometimes I did 2 days. I loved it. My husband and I like developed a relationship there. We got married, we had a CrossFit wedding, it was the whole thing. And then I had a baby, and then the pandemic hit, and I was like, oh my God, like, I need rest. Like, I cannot exercise at this intensity 5 days a week when I'm only sleeping for 6 interrupted hours a night. And so I stopped completely, and I felt so much failure and shame because there were moms in the gym who were bringing their babies in strollers and they were having a great time, but it was just depleting me so hard. And so when I did finally quit my job, my full-time insurance career job, which had a grieving process of its own, to start this business full-time, I began to sleep more soundly, and I began to eat more appropriately for my cycle because I was digging into this kind of stuff. And I also started exercising again, way less intense. I had like 2 or 3 intense days a week, and it kind of depends on my cycle or whatever. And I'm seeing the same results physically on the outside, but feeling like just way better. So it's a crucial thing. And even, I'm like ranting, I'm sorry, but
no, not at all.
There is a great book called Good for a Girl. And it's by a woman named Lauren Flashman, who was a professional long distance runner. So she wrote her book about how when she played collegiate soccer, many of the girls were missing their periods. And it was just a thing that happened when and Reischea probably like gonna know all about this, when you are more intense athletically and you miss your periods. But what they didn't know, and what is just kind of being discussed now, is what happens to the rest of you when you miss a period, right? So I think the U.S. women's soccer team really made this topic kind of come into the forefront when they began to organize their training around the cycles of the women on the team. And that was the year that they won the World Cup.
That in and of itself is a whole other conversation when you bring in the diet, the exercise, and the effects on women's bodies, and yes, the intensity of training. Even when I was in the best shape of my life, I never lost my cycle, but I did know I had fellow athletes and what have you who did. And so that was, its own thing that you're dealing with, but I experienced. Right. And then there's the whole, your body fat and all of these other things. I remember a conversation with one of my coaches, and I did a dunk tank body fat test. And I think it came back to like 12 or 10% or something like that, which by the way was really, really good.
Yeah.
And then his response is, oh, we'll get it below 10. And I'm like, I don't want to get it below 10.
No.
I don't need to get it below 10, even though there are plenty of women that do. But once you start getting it below 10, and those are the individuals who are starting to lose their cycles,
Oh,
is when they're getting it below 10 into that
yeah.
that extreme 5%. That is part of what was going on there.
And all he knew was what the boys were being advised to do. That's what he'd been taught, right?
The one thing I always found interesting with cycles in women is how eventually, if you're around a certain group enough, you kind of all got on the same train. That I always was like, we're cycling up together.
Yeah. I wonder what that's about. I've not looked into that at all.
And to this day, I don't get it. I don't understand how that happens, because your cycle is your cycle and you've got your cycle figured out. Now, yes, it shifts because it's what, you're 21 to 28 to maybe 31 days, depending on who you are. But I always found it interesting that eventually, like in college, I'm cycling up with my roommate or my track mates. I'm like, why are we cycled up together? We weren't before. We were a good like 2-3 weeks off, and now we're like, oh, it's you. Yeah, it's us. It's the crew. The crew's on.
Well, it's witchcraft is what it is. Right?
So listen, Katie, as you were getting ready to launch, you were asking women to share their period stories. What were you learning? Did anything in particular in that feedback stand out to you?
Yes, one very strong thing that stood out to me, which was that many women who I consider bold and personable and outgoing completely clammed up and shut down when I asked them to share their period story, and still having a very hard time getting women to do it. So I have this long-term vision of my company where it's really not just a box, right? The box is the physical representation of the membership, but what you're actually getting in that month is access to expert advice from doctors, nutritionists, yoga instructors, that kind of thing, mental health therapists, whatever, as well as a digital virtual community with other women who are talking openly about this, sharing best practices, maybe offering to speak in different engagements. So much more of like a community of women doing this together. And the box is what comes to connect you, right? But I want to include an option for women, for my customers, to record videos of themselves talking about their periods to kind of jumpstart that community building. It's been very, very difficult. Most women don't. If I ask the question, like, tell me about your first period, and then that child who had their first period just like comes over them again, and you can see them almost like physically not shrink, but like settle into the vision of what they were seeing when they were 11. And it's really tender and sad almost. So that's been surprising to me, that there is much more, I think, healing to do than I thought there was at the beginning.
That's really interesting to word it in that way too, the healing. I mean, imagine we have half the world's population that has a healing process to go through over a very natural, like you said earlier, I loved how you said like this critical component of the human existence. And we have to heal about how that started.
Yeah.
It's heavy. It's really heavy.
We do.
Okay.
And I mean, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. You probably heard of that. And it's about the way that even memories like that happen as an early child that we don't cognitively have in our brains, but like our muscles and our cells, our very physical body keeps memories of trauma. And so I do wonder, and it's a little bit kind of spiritual, I guess, but I do wonder what would happen to mental health in general, to relationships. And Julie, you mentioned like you think the whole world would be different if periods were more positive. What kind of chronic experiences would women at large release from their bodies if they went back to their menstrual experiences and their pubescent experiences and healed those?
Well, you have to look at it from a perspective of, let's replace the word period with any type of experience that you had in your life that had a negative effect on you. And then if you can visualize that, then you say, okay, so replace that bullying encounter you had in elementary school with the word period. And when you are able to discuss it and break it down and release it, and then all of a sudden your shoulders loosen up, the tightness, the stress. And so when you're able to release, and I don't like referring to my cycle as trauma, but when you're able to release trauma, the bullying experience, whatever bad thing that happened to you, when you're able to let that go, you do find yourself able to, quote, sleep better, or just in general feeling lighter, being able to do more because you're not holding on to something and trying to keep it buried, and it keeps finding its way to bubble up to the surface. So if you can do that with other areas in your life, and it just so happens that the cycle is that thing that's always kind of been a source of psychological warfare with you, then imagine if you could let that go, just like any other thing, how much better of a person you would be for yourself, just to be in a better headspace, because you're no longer envisioning the, quote, for lack of a better term, trauma that goes with it. For me, while it wasn't an issue to have a discussion about it, when I got older and the uterine fibroids kicked in, the realizing that my period is coming was extremely stressful. It was extremely stressful. And it wasn't that I couldn't discuss it, but it was that I knew that at some point I was going to be laid down. I'm going to say it, naked on the floor with a bucket next to me, because I couldn't stop sweating, and I'm throwing up or feeling like I'm going to throw up, and everything that went along with it. And my poor husband, might have been boyfriend or husband at the time, I can't remember where we are. Oh, we were married. Okay. So standing over me like, I don't know what to do for you.
He's like, that is husband work right there.
He's like,
I don't know what boyfriend
right?
would do that.
He's like, I don't know how to help you. I'm like, just get me a cold towel. It's just like, but, and once I had the surgery, and all of a sudden, I'm not dealing with that anymore. And I used to laugh, and I know I'm rambling here, but there was a commercial for Always pads, and it was have a happy period. And I would get so mad every time I watched that ad, because I'm like, who has a happy period? Have you experienced my period? It's freaking 3 weeks long.
Toxic positivity. There it is.
Yeah, so toxic.
Surgery. And then I was like, I'm having a happy period. They're like a normal length. There's no stress. I barely have a cramp. I sweat. I sweat at night. I know when it's coming, but it's not as traumafying anymore. It's not as stressful anymore, because I know there are parts of it that I don't have to deal with anymore. Now, granted, that's because of a surgical thing that I had to do, but if you can find a way to release it, I think it helps. It has to. It's
well, I also think, Reischea,
thing.
How many years did you go not having surgery, when, like, even knowing if it was an option for you, knowing that there are other interventions? I mean, how many things, and it were not just our periods, but other, female related health conditions or symptoms we experience that we just don't talk about.
Right.
I was talking with a friend the other day about menopause. In fact, she ended up featuring me on her podcast, talking about menopause in the workplace. But, we were talking about it, and she mentioned to me about like this severe joint pain that she has, and feeling like she was never going to be able to run again. And I was like, joint pain? Like, that's a part of, like, I didn't know that's a part. Like, I don't even know that it's a part of it. Like, I don't know what all these symptoms are. If I don't know, how are men supposed to know? How are people in general supposed to know? I don't remember ever even learning about menopause, for instance, in school. We learned about, how to use a condom and abstinence and tampons and pads. Like, that was about the extent of it, and how
remember what the term
crazy,
was.
scary STIs look,
And remember what the term was. They wouldn't even use the term menopause. It was
the change.
Oh, Yes.
The change.
We're going
And I
through the
think it's important
change.
too to point out that, like, when we're talking, reach back to your point about the trauma of this, like it really is trauma, and Katie, you were talking about how the body holds on to that trauma. And we're not just talking about for the little girls who are starting their periods for the first time. Like, this is ongoing all throughout life. I mean, I think if I were to even, okay, let me paint the scene and see how you guys feel as I say this. Like, imagine you're sitting in a board meeting and all of the sudden you can tell that your period is coming on. Like, I say that and we all go back to that feeling of like, like, how am I going to bleed through? Am I going to, like, is it going to be on my clothing? Is it going to be on the chair? Like, what if I have to stand up? Like, all of the things that we go through. And that's just one teeny tiny example of something that could happen to a woman every single month or multiple times throughout the month, throughout their period.
Or you're having a hot flash while you're conducting a meeting. What are your options there? I know a woman who had uterine cancer, and she had a hysterectomy, which was great, and she survived it, and she's doing really, really well. But she's like, part of that is having insane hot flashes. She's like, I had like 7 or 8 a day. And because I was having these so often and they're so disruptive, when I started having one coming on, they started to give me panic attacks. I would get a panic attack about the hot flash I was going to have. She's like, I was a mess, right? But not knowing that there are solutions out there, not knowing that it doesn't have to be this way, it's so debilitating, right? But we again tolerate way more madness around our bodies than we actually have to. And beginning to hold our providers accountable for that, I think, is another thing that women need to do. That your doctor is not necessarily an expert in your body. Right. Actually, you are the expert of your body.
But we also need to tell our healthcare providers what we're experiencing, because that's the other side of it. While we may not necessarily discuss it, the person that we definitely need to have that open conversation with, sometimes we're not. We will just kind of, gloss over it. Oh, it's a little whatever. Oh, it's a little, instead of saying, I am sweating my ass off from the time I go to bed, and I can't, having the open dialogue with your healthcare provider, telling them, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what it's like. What can we do? Because I'm finding out they're actually now just kind of figuring it all out themselves, because no one was ever really studying it and paying close attention to it. And so we have to open up our mouths and speak, not even just amongst ourselves, but to the healthcare providers, and tell them what's happening with our bodies and what's happening with our mental experience. And, and now when I'm thinking about it, as we're having this conversation, the other side of it, Julie, you talked about, imagine sitting in a board meeting and you can tell that it's coming on, or, recognizing, I was one, like I said, I had very heavy cycles. So I was wearing tampons and pads simultaneously, recognizing I need to go change my pad, and I need to change it now. And I'm on the air. What am I, and now you're thinking about your clothes, and I'm lucky I had a clothing allowance, and nothing of that nature affected my clothes that I needed to, but that thought of, do I have everything I need to get through today?
Well, and then, so we got to talk about that as it relates to poverty. We cannot end this without talking about that, because, oh my gosh, yes. So Helping Women Period is a nonprofit that began in 2015, and you should totally have
featured Lizzie Tate, the co-founder on our podcast. So we'll link to that episode too.
Oh my God, it's so important. And one thing she told me really early on in the journey of this product was that not only does not having period products in schools create bleeding for girls and issues for girls in poverty often only have 1 or 2 pairs of pants. So imagine you don't have pads with you at school. Your school doesn't stock the pads, and you've stained one of the only pairs of pants that you own. And now every day you walk around on your period or not, and there it is. Right? Like, period poverty is such an issue that needs to be eradicated. There's just no excuse. If you're willing to put toilet paper in the bathrooms, and not ask kids to bring their own toilet paper to school, then there should not be any different treatment with menstrual products. There simply shouldn't be. And the only reason that it is different is because the boys don't have the periods, right? If they did, this would not be happening. So starting to like ruffle some feathers a little bit with honesty around that issue too in my professional circles. Like this is
what a woman ruffling
issue.
feathers. Oh, stop.
Ruffle those
Come
feathers.
on.
And Katie, you're
on.
doing more than just ruffling feathers too. You donate a percentage of your proceeds, your profits to tell us about that. You have a partnership, I believe, with.
Yeah, I do. So 10% of profits from my company are donated to Helping Women, period, specifically to target equity in schools or period poverty in schools. I honestly hope that I can increase that percentage over time, right? Because the mission of the company, again, is to disrupt mindsets around menstruation and now menopause too. The mission of the company is not to be a billionaire. So like what I would love is for there to never be another girl ever in my community, in my state, in my country, in the world who has shame, confusion, no products that she needs when she has a period. That's the goal of the company. And so I just launched in April, right? I've been planning this for a year. I just went live in April. And so this is my third cycle right now. So my boxes are not monthly, they're periodic. And in that cycle that I'm sending out, there's products that are sourced from women-owned businesses all over the world. Fair trade, sustainable
Let's dive into the box a little bit. Like tell us about your products. Tell us about like what do women get in this box each month?
It's always different. There's typically a spa item, a sweet item, sometimes a salty item, and then some things that you can keep for yourself, like jewelry pieces or like a shower steamer shelf. So the whole idea is that it was just such a natural fit, right? Like if I began with, I want a box that comes to my door to congratulate me for the fact that I am amazing enough to have a period while I live my life. Like that was really like the beginning of it in my head.
I love that. I'm amazing enough to have a period in my life. This
is incredible. My body is doing an incredible, miraculous process as I'm just like picking up laundry off the floor and writing a commercial auto policy. Like this is amazing that I can do this, right? And then quickly that morphed into like, what am I going to source these products from giant manufacturers when there are women that I know who can create amazing candles and snacks and whatever, in their houses. So knowing that I'm not contributing to waste is great. So everything in the box that I can has minimal packaging. I have eco-friendly filler in the box as well. So that when I package things that are heavy like glass or whatever, they're safe, but they don't end up in landfills. And there's typically 4 to 6 items in a box, depending on the particular product that month. And I'm not sure when this is going to air, but I will be doing more like trade shows and kind of vendor events this summer too, so people can see the boxes for themselves.
What's the website? Where can people find the period pick me up?
Oh wait, that way. Okay, there's the URL, pickmeupbox.net, right there. They can find me, and that's where they can order their product. And then I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, which has been a whole adventure by itself at the period pick me up. And it's a startup, right? We're in iterative processes, and I've already made some changes from the beginning. And so I like extend my most sincere gratitude and thank you to the customers like Julie, who ordered from the beginning, because I really need the support and the feedback in order to create a process and a product that actually speaks to the needs that women are experiencing. So this will continue to grow and evolve and change. I want a company that reflects real women, not a company that tries to tell women how they should be real,
Yes. Oh, huge distinction there. Yeah. Okay. I have one more question before we kind of wrap things up. I know you've faced some challenges, one in particular around, I know you face, like all startups, we have like all the ups and downs that we experience in the first couple of months, but one in particular, I think brings this conversation full circle, and it's dealing with the calendar and men who I'm sure came up with how to set up subscriptions. Oh my God. Tell us about the challenge just with the monthly cycle. And
so this is nuts, right? So the COVID created a rise of e-commerce and online retail and entrepreneurs. And so it's easier than ever to create a website and to sell things online. It just is. The subscription models that are out of the box plugins for a website allow the company to say, okay, this product gets sent out every 30 days or once a week or whatever. And you can pick your frequency. So you can say, I want it to come on Wednesdays. Okay, great. I want it to come every 2 weeks. Okay, great. But there is nothing that exists out of the box that allows you to have an order date that does not also trigger order fulfillment. So the first time someone goes to order their box, like my box, my system says, okay, great, Katie, go fill that order right now. But the customer doesn't want it for 3 more weeks because their period doesn't start then, right? And the reoccurring frequency is another technological thing. So I have spent many, many months and many, many hours with many, many experts trying to find a way to separate order date from order fulfillment and reoccurring frequency. But because they're all built around like the Roman calendar and they're not built around periods, that it's been the source of conflict in my business. It's been nuts. So
and some cycles are 28 days, some women might be 30, some women are, it's all different. And it's just, so to me, that's been, as someone who works with a lot of startups, it's just a very unique challenge that again, emphasizes the challenges that women have in general.
Like even meeting our own needs, even if we have the best of intentions and we want to do it, meeting our own needs does come up against this norm, right? This like masculine norm in technology, even though I'm pretty sure it might be a folktale, but like women created the calendar because why would men need to track 28 days or something? Like a bone was found in a cave or whatever with like 28-day cycles. It's been an issue from the beginning of time.
Yeah, there's just so much.
There's so much, but it's changing, right? Like this podcast 5 years ago, this podcast wouldn't have happened, right? 3 years ago, it may not have happened. I mean, it's new, it's happening. The conversation is kind of like picking up steam and energy around our own community in the mid-Michigan area, but I think all over, and it's not going to stop, right? My 5-year-old girl, a future menstruator, is going to have no qualms talking about this or getting help that she needs. And she's not going to tolerate needing a tampon and a pad and a bucket to have her period, right?
Amen.
There you go.
Katie, we are huge fans. Love your passion. Love what you're doing. Love the conversations that you're sparking along the way. Keep us in the loop and let us know as you make changes to your business, as you offer new products or subscription services. I know you're thinking about a few things along the way. So keep us in the loop on that. And audience, make sure you check out pickmeupbox.net to learn more about the period Pick Me Up and about Katie and what she's doing. But before we go, Katie, we have 3 rapid fire questions that we ask every woman, every guest on this show. Are you ready?
Yes.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring women leaders?
Life happens in seasons and you just might not be in the season, right? But you're always planting or harvesting. It's okay to be in the season that you are and see a different future for yourself. It doesn't mean you're not working hard enough or you're failing. You're just in a season.
What a nice way to look at that. I love that. Can you share a book, a quote, a thought, a resource, something that was significant that impacted you on your journey?
The Bible, I gotta say it. It just is. It's true. Also, a book called The Big Enough Company. It's by 2 women who own a business incubator in New York City, and they take entrepreneurs in their book side by side. So like 2 women who, one runs an online boutique, one runs a physical boutique, and they both make the same decision for their business. One is miserable, one is happy. Their whole premise is entrepreneurship is hard enough. It's a tragedy if you end up with a job that you hate. So from the very beginning of your company, try to create the job that you love in your company so that when it is big, you're doing what you love all along. The Big Enough Company.
Katie, if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I actually think it's the same advice that I would give aspiring entrepreneurs, right? You're in different seasons. It's okay, Katie. Like you see a future for yourself. And right now, you're not living in that future. It doesn't mean that you have failed. It doesn't mean that you're not hustling. It just means that you're being prepared, right? Continue to allow preparation to happen. Don't force, just facilitate and flow, and you'll get there.
Katie, thank you so much for just getting rid of just sloughing off the silence and the negativity that comes with the conversation, actually bringing some smiles and joy to the discussion. Listen, it's not a comfortable thing. And I mean, physically, it's not a comfortable thing. And there's no way to change that, but to be able to have a conversation and laugh and smile and not feel like, to get quiet as we're talking about my cycle, I think is awesome. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your candor and your stories. They really do make change.
We're doing it one day at a time, one cycle at a time.
Yeah, girl.
And that is all for this episode of Think Tank of Three.